Guys, cool Canada. Um, so thank you again. And Erin, if you want to introduce yourself, I'll take this screen off and we'll set you up with yours. Maybe.
Super. Thanks, Gina.
Thank you.
Just move this over. There we go. Can you guys see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, and there is this, can you guys help me? There's this weird box in the top right corner saying like orange. Do you guys see that?
Yes.
Please move this window away from something. I have no idea. Have you guys had this before? This is new to me today. So it's the second time it's happened. I have no idea what it means.
I've had it before, and it's usually because you have your window over top of something else, or it's just being cranky. It'll work okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I apologize. I don't know where I can move stuff so that it doesn't show, but anyways, all right. Super. Well, thank you very much for having me. I am really glad to be with you. I'm really glad to not actually be in Arizona because Meredith and Gina were telling me how crazy hot it is. I'm up here in Canada. I'm in southern Ontario, about an hour and a half southwest of Toronto. So while we do get some warm days, we certainly don't have to face what you're facing. So, and for that, I'm very glad. So a little bit about me. I've been in the volunteer engagement profession for about 20 years. I have my certificate in volunteer management from a college in Ontario called Conestoga College. I later taught in the program for about a decade. And about, I don't know, 15 years ago, I started Spink Tank, and I now offer a number of online courses. You can see the link on the screen. I also do consulting and training, and you may have read some of the free resources that I put out, for example, the top 20 ideas in volunteer engagement for 2020 ebook. And you can visit me at spinktank.ca. I will just flag, I am having problems with my website. If you sign up to download anything and you don't get it, just email me and I will make sure that you get sent that. So I'll apologize in advance if you have any problems. I am working on it. So I would say, you know, what most appeals to me and what I love talking about in volunteer engagement is really, you know, the potential. I think that what we do is very important, you know, and really we have some compelling stories to tell. I think with the pandemic right now, there is an even higher, you know, a higher urgency for us to really make sure that people understand the work that we do and the value of the work that we do, and that volunteers do, that we are the, you know, really the kind of facilitators of. So I'm really excited to talk to you about metrics that matter, because I think metrics are a really important way that we can tell some of those compelling stories. So a little bit about the agenda. So we're going to start off with the big idea but behind metrics. We're going to do a little bit of a primer on metrics. We talk a lot about different terms, and you know, want to just make sure that we're all on the same page, starting from the same place. We're going to talk about the what. I'm going to introduce you to my 4-quadrant model that really helps you kind of break out the metrics that you may or may not be collecting, to help you understand just a really kind of framework for how to understand metrics that I think are more impactful than often the metrics that we currently are asked to collect. And then we're going to talk about how. So I'm going to give you 2 easy places to start with collecting metrics, the ones that matter, to hopefully give you some tangible tools and ideas that you can take away and start implementing right away. So I don't have, I can't actually see the chat. So Gina and Meredith, please just, chime in if there's anything in the chat I need to see. But I'm a really casual person, so feel free to, to take yourself off mute, ask a question, ask me to repeat something or explain it differently. We're here learning together, so I want to make sure that you get the most out of this, okay? So the big idea, what I like to do is frame my workshops around, kind of one big idea, sort of your conceptual kind of hat to hang on, and for me, there's one big idea when I think about metrics, and not just metrics, but the metrics that matter. There's, for me, one really big idea that I keep coming to the more I think about it, the more I talk with colleagues like yourselves about metrics, and that is that we track far too much and it tells us far too little. So, leaders and volunteers, we're no strangers to tracking data. We're no strangers to tracking, quite frankly, an incredible amount of minutia, to be honest. So it's certainly not that, it's like, I'm not here to introduce you to collecting metrics. I know you're doing that already and doing quite a lot of it. But what I would say is that we definitely, in all of that data that we're tracking, very little of it is actually the kind of stuff that's going to help us advance our practice, to grow our influence in our organizations, to be able to really tell compelling stories about the work and the value that we bring and that volunteers bring, and the difference that's making in our organizations. And so I think that it's really important that we do, take a moment to reflect and really think about the metrics that we collect and whether they do actually matter or not. So a little bit, as I promised, a metrics kind of primer. So you may have, oh, great, metrics that matter, great. I'm going to get this magical formula that tells me, or Erin's going to tell me what I should collect and what I shouldn't collect. So I hate to burst your bubble, but there is no magical formula. I have no magic wand. There are certainly things that I'm going to recommend that you consider tracking and that you consider stopping if you're currently tracking it, or to pay less attention or more attention to. But really, the point of metrics, as we'll get into, is about insights. And so your situation may be very different. You may have things that are mandated to collect, and that's fine. We can definitely, if that is the case and you're concerned about that, then let's talk about that, because I've got some ideas for you. But really, there is no magical formula. There's, unfortunately, in our profession, there are no real benchmarks around, we know that if we have X number of applicants, we're, X percentage of them are going to be the right candidates if we do X, Y, and Z, right? So we don't have those benchmarks and those kind of broader statistics that we can use, to really get a sense of what kind of goals and numbers we might need or want. So though, unfortunately, there is no magical formula. And I'll be honest, math is actually very low on the totem pole of my skill sets, but I do love data, and hopefully by the end of this workshop, you'll if you don't love data now, you'll like it a little bit more. So that primer that I was talking about. So where are we at? So data. What does it all mean? Well, I mean, data is just information, right? It's essentially ones and zeros. It's binary, right? It's just information. And there's a lot we can do with it. There's a lot of good we can do with it. There's a lot of bad we can do with it. But it's just information. Whereas, metrics are really a quantifiable measure and actually, fun fact, metrics is simply based on the Latin term for measure. So it's really, you might hear some people use metrics. It's essentially the same thing. But typically metrics are used to track and assess the performance of something, right? Now, I do want to flag, because again, there's a lot of terms that we throw around. The difference between metrics and, say, something like KPIs, key performance indicators, think of metrics as broad, right? You're collecting a lot of different pieces, but you're not going deep. KPIs are about going deep. So metrics might be, tell me, what are all the hits, the referral sources that we get from volunteers when they come to us and apply online. That would be a good metric. A KPI would be, what, we've done some analysis, and what we know is that people who come through this referral channel, let's say word of mouth, they tend to be the people that we are looking for the most. They're the right fit. They're the ones that understand most about what the role is involves, or who we are as an organization, because they've heard about us from another volunteer, a client, a donor, something like that. So a KPI would be, we want to increase the number of referrals coming from source X, right? So the metrics, it's kind of like, I'm going to mess this up, I hope I don't, but it's kind of like gluten, right? So you can have carbs that don't have gluten, but you can never have gluten that don't have carbs. Did I say that right? If there's any people with celiac disease, but basically, so KPIs are just a collection of metrics, if that makes sense. I'm not seeing anybody's screen, so if you're just like completely lost, unmute and stop me, and I'm happy to go back over that. But basically, just for the purposes of this presentation, data is just information, and metrics is the compilation of that information that we use to track progress towards goals and things like that. Okay. So, as we said, there's no shortage of things that we do collect or that we would like to collect. So you can't pick your data, but you really do need to pick your metrics. And I found this really funny little card, and I thought it was very appropriate here. So you can't choose your family, but you can choose your therapist. And that's very much like your data. You can't choose your data, but you have to figure out what are you actually going to track. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's so important in a second. So is everybody with me so far? If I can get you to go off mute and just say yay.
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 Awesome.
Yay.
All right. I'm not alone in the universe. Excellent. Thank you. So there's 3 rules of thumb when we're talking about what makes a metric good or bad. And the first is that it's consistent. So if I pull this data today and I pull it a month from now, am I actually pulling the same data in terms of, it might not actually be exactly the same data, but I'm actually pulling the same slice, right? So it's consistent. It's, there's no point in saying, oh, well, I pulled it, yesterday, but today it's actually pulling maybe different variables or something like that. So no, that's not helpful. A good metric is consistent. You have what they call reliability, that you're pulling the same stuff all the time. The second rule of thumb is that it's cheap or easy to collect. So, for some of us, we may have to outsource, depending on what platforms we use, or maybe we don't have an internal IT team or a database coordinator, and so we actually have to go out to someone else, or we have to rely on a coworker to pull that. That's neither cheap nor easy. So we want metrics that are consistent, that we have confidence in that we're pulling the same stuff all the time, and that it is cheap and easy to collect. Okay. And the third thing is that it's quick, right? No one has, you know, a plethora of time that they're just looking to fill. We're all very busy. So it needs to be something that can be done quickly. Whether it might take some time initially, perhaps to set up some of the reports, if that's, you know, how you're collecting that data. It may take you maybe a bit of time to format or something like that, and then it's done for, you know, forevermore until you change that metric. But essentially it's quick. So it's consistent, it's cheap and easy to collect, and it's quick. Those are the three kind of good metrics rules of thumb. So I wanted to ask in the chat, can you please let me know which of these three is the most challenging for you based on the metrics that you're collecting right now? Just put in the chat your name and well, your name will show up, but you know, just say, is it the consistency that you're struggling with or that you find challenging? Is it that, you know, it's not cheap or it's not easy to get access to this this information, or that it just takes forever? So I'm going to open up the chat just because I'd really love to learn. Okay, so we've got consistent, we've got quick, not easy. So yeah, number 2. Okay. So Linda's saying you're asked for different things. Interesting. So I would actually say that it's less that you're not asked for the same things. It's that you're asked for a bunch of different stuff. So it's not easy. And it sounds like it's not quick. Right. Okay. Awesome. Thanks. So we've got a lot of consistence, a lot of not easies. Is there one quick? Okay, Alex, you said it's not quick. That's what you're struggling with. Anybody else? And I'll maybe just ask you if you're comfortable, take yourself off mute. And I'd love to just, you know, if you can just give an example of, you know, if you said that it's, you know, not cheap or easy or not quick or not consistent. Can you give us an example of that?
Hi, Erin, this is Linda.
Hi.
One of the things that I'm experiencing, and I don't know if this is common across other organizations, but our organization is really struggling right now to determine how relevant we are in the space that we're in. And so I answer to a board of volunteers. They're all volunteers. Nobody's paid but me. But they constantly want different metrics. They want different reports. And I feel like right now, especially, I spend my whole time collating data and rearranging it to fit what they're asking me.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's a little frustrating because I feel like I'm measuring, I'm trying to compare apples and oranges in a lot of situations.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Linda. That's really interesting. And I definitely suspect that you're not alone right now, that we're all probably getting a lot of requests for different information. And I hope that today's session will be helpful for you, because it's really very much, you know, about being parsimonious and very strategic in what we're actually measuring. Because the other thing that often people make mistakes around is thinking that there's a correlation, right, between one factor and another outcome, right, and that it's often not a causal relationship. So that yeah, thank you for sharing that. Does anybody else want to share?
I'll share. This is Gina.
Yeah.
The information that I get asked a lot is, to collect not only, like how many volunteers, how many hours, right? We all get that, but like how many, because I work for Habitat for Humanity. So, how many families did the volunteers help? Or something like that. And or how many houses did they build? And that's been difficult for me because it's not consistent. In my mind, and I haven't really came up with a formula like how to calculate that. So that's always my issue, because I do want to know that information, and I feel like that's good for volunteers to know and donors. Yeah, so
is it hard because volunteers might be doing on a build like maybe a portion of a house, but they're maybe not doing the whole house, or maybe they're participating in different multiple builds, but again, not the whole of it. Is that, if I'm understanding, Gina?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so if let's say there's 19 homes, and during the week there's various volunteers doing various things on various houses, and so it's hard for me to calculate like what the percentage of work they got done.
Yeah.
And then to calculate that, I mean, we can always estimate, but yeah, I just don't know how to really work with that.
Yeah. I that's interesting. I actually think that that's very similar to what I heard from Linda, in the sense of, leadership, you can kind of see what they're trying to articulate and what they're trying to get to, but perhaps they don't have the right metric, for it, right? And so really, if we go back here, like, the data is the data, right? So people will do the hours, they'll, like, it is what it is, they'll do those, those hours, there's that many volunteers. You can't mess around too much with that, but you really need to pick your metrics.
Gotcha.
So thank you for that. Right. And here's why this is, so thank you, all of you for sharing that, because here's why it matters, is that the whole point of metrics is about insights, right? It's actionable, data-informed findings that create business value. So you might actually have, just to go back to the last, the rule of thumb slide, you might have metrics that are consistent, that you pull regularly. It's the same, you're pulling the same slice of pie, all the time. It's cheap and easy, and it's quick to do. But so what? What does it actually tell you? What decisions are you making as a result of it, right? And sometimes people like to just do a Jackson Pollock and throw everything at the wall and think that perhaps we will somehow get some insights from that. And that's just simply not how metrics works. That's not how, sometimes you can actually be like, oh wait, we've never compared these things, and you could have some serendipitous insights, but typically that's not how it works. So you can have things that are cheap and easy, you can have a million things, but if they're not actually creating actionable, data-informed findings that are helping you be either better in your job, be more effective as an organization, to be able to deliver more compelling stories and feedback to volunteers and staff, then actually what you're just doing is wasting time, right?
Hi, Erin, this is
Sharon.
I'm just wondering, the whole idea of what metrics you're going to be collecting so that they're consistent month to month and year to year, isn't that the part of the overall goal setting plan and as well as evaluation that a volunteer leadership should be working out with the executive director and or board chair, so that you're consistent with whatever the agency's goals are and metrics that they are measuring? Isn't that part of the whole, so that it shouldn't be random month to month, but you should know, this is what my agency's goals are. This is what I'm being measured on. This is what we're being measured on by our funders. And that should drive you then to the possible metrics, the possible data, and then using whatever you're going to provide us today, that would help you wean it down to what is manageable and what is appropriate.
I totally agree, Sharon. I totally agree. Everything should cascade down. It should be about the strategic. I think sometimes though, what can happen is people sometimes data can be very much like rabbits where they multiply very quickly. And people think that there's a better, more is better, which isn't always the case. And if we think about our goals, we have maybe our goals that need particular metrics to track that. And then we have maybe broader departmental or maybe a project or program goals, and maybe those need, a few different metrics. And then you've got the organization wide. So they can actually, as much as it should all cascade down, most of our organizations are pretty complex, right? And volunteer engagement being as central as it is to our organizations, we have our fingers in a lot of pies. So I certainly hear what you're saying, but I can see very easily and have experienced myself how quickly these things can kind of multiply, right? Especially if people think that, oh, well, it's easy to pull this stuff, right? So I absolutely agree. It should be very focused. It should be based on strategic conversations. I'd also say though that, and I think, Linda's story illustrates this a lot, not everybody actually understands what really are the metrics that matter, right? So they might say, well, we want you to collect volunteer hours. So full disclosure, I'm a volunteer hour hater. So you may disagree, that's okay. Would love to argue with you about that someday, but like, it can take you an enormous amount of time to collect just that, that one metric, to put on one report on a month. This is this many hours that volunteers gave in a month, right? So, and really, it's not actually telling us anything of value. So I think there's the work that goes into it, and also people sometimes think, and we're going to actually go through an exercise very shortly, that really drills down to, are we actually, is the metric that we're collecting actually collecting what we think it's intending to collect, right? If that makes sense. So so I'm going to continue that conversation, Sharon, because I think you raise a really excellent point. So thank you. So and just, exactly what you were saying here. I mean, the point of metrics is insights, right? And they should be very much aligned with the big picture of things. So I wanted to share an example. This is an old example, but I think it's a really good example still, and still resonates very much. So back in 2011, DoSomething.org, which is an American organization that you may be familiar with, you may be more familiar than I am with it, but they ask youth to donate their used sports equipment to other youth. As we know, there can be lots of barriers to doing recreational sports. And so their goal and their mission is really to at least reduce the barrier of access to the equipment that's needed by donating used equipment so everyone can play. So they spent some time in 2011. So this, like I said, this is a bit of an older example, but they put together a video. They'd been doing videos for quite some time. They'd been posting them on YouTube. YouTube was a really, like, it was the new thing in 2011. And they did this video, and it was a huge success, and they were so thrilled. They had twice the number of views for this one video they did than any other video they'd done before. It had YouTube celebrities, and it had 1.5 million views, which back in the day, that was actually quite a lot. It was, this is before we'd ever coined the term viral and all of that. So a little context. And and they were just thrilled. They were thinking, oh my God, we've just knocked it out of the park, right? This is great. And then they started reflecting, right? They started saying, well, wait a second, let's really look at this. The metric we're focusing on right now is the number of views with 1.5, and we think we're doing awesome. But let's dive a little bit deeper and let's align this, as Sharon's been saying, with our mission. And so being able to say, okay, well, if our mission is to get people to sign up to donate their used sports equipment, how did we do on that metric? Because that's actually the metric that really matters. And I apologize, my partner's walking in the door and the dog is going to probably go nuts in 2 seconds. I'm presenting. Sorry. So they really started looking at, okay, so if what we're trying to do right now, if what we're trying to do, if our goal is if our mission as an organization is to get people to donate their sports equipment, their used sports equipment, then how do we do on that metric? And it turns out of those 1.5 million viewers, I'm going to get you to guess. In the chat, I want you to guess how many people signed up to donate used sports equipment. Just take a guess. Just type it in the chat. Out of 1.5 million viewers, how many people? Okay, so Linda's saying 100. 900, Diane. Okay. 800. Oh, 17, 50. 250. Okay. So out of 1.5 million viewers, 8 people signed up to donate their used equipment. 8 people. And out of, oh, sad face, Tina. And out of those 8 people, guess how many actually donated? 0. 0 people. So 0 of those 8, none of those 8 people actually followed through and donated their used equipment. And so when you start looking at metrics and parsing out, you know, sometimes the flashy or what we call some of those vanity metrics versus the stuff that's actually really aligned with our goals, our strategies, our purpose, our mission, and the things that actually tell us how we're doing, those can be very different things, right? But sometimes the flashy is exciting. So I just wanted to share that story with you because I thought it was a really good example of there's metrics and there's no shortage of metrics that you can collect, but you really need to always reflect on, are they the metrics that matter? Are they the ones that you are going to make decisions about your organization, about your work, about your focus and your priorities? And are they ones that are actually going to lead to better things, right? So if DoSomething.org had said, wow, 1.5 million viewers, all right, well, we're going to do more of these videos and we're going to get these same YouTube celebrities and all this stuff, that they could have gone down an entirely different road and put time and money into doing more of these videos until they actually looked at the metrics that mattered and saw, whoa, big waste of time, waste of energy, waste of everything, right? So I just thank you for your guesses. I just wanted to share that story because I think it's a really good illustration of an important
I
point.
have a quick question though. Did they
Yeah.
track, were there any donations that were generated by all that publicity?
Oh, good
that
question,
was
Karen.
separate from because maybe you didn't get the volunteers, but did they also do an ask? Was there any charitable giving that they were trying to track or measure from that?
Yeah. To my knowledge, no. I don't think that they measured that. I think based on the information that I read in the story, that no, there weren't a lot of donations. The other thing is, right, again, thinking about metrics that matter, you might say, well, wow, 1.5 million. If we're an organization that maybe doesn't have really high profile, then maybe our actual goal, it would have been great. It would have been extra if we'd had more people signed up and more people donated their sports equipment, but really our goal was actually to raise the profile. Then maybe you could say, well, 1.5 million, that's a huge success. Maybe let's presume that 3/4 of those 1.5 million people now know about us and hadn't heard about us before, right? So again, it all goes back to, what matters depends on what your goals are, what you're trying to achieve. So thank you for that, Sharon, because I agree. Like, there could have been little kind of side bennies, but in this case, to my knowledge, based on the information I read about that story, that wasn't the case. All right. So just to sum that all up, here's a quote that I think is really, I think just really speaks to the conversation and the information that we've just been talking about. Good data scientists know that analyzing the data, that's the easy part, right? I love crunching numbers, even though I don't like math, but I love just, oh, well, what does this say? And well, how much is this? And all of that. That's, you could just go down a rabbit's hole with that, right? But the hard part is really figuring out what matters. And there's a great article that I've hyperlinked from the Harvard Business Review, which actually has the DoSomething.org story in it, by Blatt and Philbin. It's a little bit older, 2013, but still encourage you to check that out. It's a really good article. So, Gina and Meredith, I am going to ask for your assistance. I might be able to do this. Just let me see if I can do this myself. Oops. But what I want to do is start the, in 2 seconds. I just want to explain it first, but I'm hoping we can start the breakout rooms. So basically, we're going to break out into, let's do 2 breakout rooms. Not 3. Is that a problem, Gina and Meredith?
Not at all. We've got it set up for you.
Awesome. You guys rock. So just let's do 2 because of the numbers we have. We want to have some good conversation. So basically, you're going to go into a breakout room, and you're going to get one of these 4 very common metrics that leaders of volunteers track. And I want you to answer a few questions. So I want you to think about, what does your assigned metric really measure when you boil it down to the nitty-gritty, right? So what are you really trying to get at when you track the number of applications or the number of volunteer hours? And is it actually tracking what you think it's tracking? And is this the best way to measure what it's intended to track? And then are there recommendations? Are there other things that you think actually would be better, that you could use as a different metric that would actually give you better information about what you're really trying to track? So, again, you're gonna, let's say that one group does the number of applications, and another one does the number of active volunteers. So if we number the groups, group 1 does the number of applications, group 2 does the number of active volunteers, and you're going to answer the questions. What does your assigned metric really measure when you boil it down? And is it measuring what you think it's intended to measure? Is this the best way to measure what you think it's intending to measure? And would you recommend a different metric instead? And if so, what? Okay, and I'll type that in the chat while you guys are chatting. So, is that, do you have everything that you need, Gina, to press a magic button and make that happen?
We're ready to go.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to give you, just let me do a quick time check here. So it's 20 after. Let's say we're going to take about 7 minutes to chat so that we can have a really robust conversation, and then we'll come back into the main room in about 7 minutes. And I'd love for you to just to share kind of the conversation that you had, and some of the kind of things that came out of your conversation. Okay. Awesome. All right. So are we all back? Wonderful. Okay. Well, I hope you had good conversations, and I'd love to invite you to share maybe a bit of a summary about, so there's the number of volunteer applications and, oh my goodness, what was the second one we chose? The number of volunteers, I think, right?
We chose, yeah, number of active volunteers. That's
Active
what we.
volunteers? Okay. All right. So let's hear about that. Let's hear from that group because I was part of the other group.
Well, I think most of our conversation was what we kind of how we tracked active volunteers. And then we kind of towards the end, we're like, but wait, what does that really tell us? So we didn't actually get to finish, and what other metric, could tell us. I know that Carrie had something good that they did. I don't know if Carrie wants to share that, but yeah, I think we mostly talked about like what we do and what you consider an active volunteer. But yeah, Carrie, if you wanted to share.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, we track number of active volunteers, but that's pretty much all it tells us is who's active and who's not. So we also track, and I will say this is specific to our interpretive volunteers, we track how many meaningful interactions they have with our guests, which goes back to part of our mission and affecting change and behavior change. And then that's recorded when they clock out for their shift, how many people they interacted with. So we have that as a baseline to be able to compare year to year.
Cool. Thank you. I love, Carrie, how you, how that it's like, okay, well, it's just so that we know who to talk to, who's active, who's not. It's very transactional. What we spend more time on tracking is really the more meaningful stuff, which is directly related to our mission. And we know why we're tracking that. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else from that group want to just chime in with anything?
Diane, what were you going to say?
Was that our group? Was
I think we're still on group number 2, Sharon.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Not a problem. I think Gina's trying to volunteer Diane to share something awesome.
Well, Gina knows I never speak up, so.
Well, you're a wallflower like me, Diane.
Yes, very much. But I typed it in the chat that if you can turn it into what results or impact the volunteers had, people like to see, oh, I had 100 volunteers or I had 1,000 volunteers because it's a number. But if you can say, oh, and when I worked for hospice, you really broke it out by what tasks they did. Did they work in the hospice home? Did they go out to people's homes? Did they drive people? And that way you could say, oh, 20 patients got to their doctor's appointments because of our staff.
Right.
It's a lot like Carrie's talking about, what did they do and why is it important?
Yeah. And volunteers want to know that, like they're giving up their Netflix time, right, to help us. Like our competition is not each other. Rob Jackson does a great presentation around this about, 21st century volunteering. Our competition is not one another. Our competition is everything else going on in the world. It's those gem games on your cell phone, and it's Netflix binges, and it's, that's our competition, right? Super. Okay, so group number 1 who did number of volunteer applications, Sharon and Daniel. What would you guys, how would you summarize the conversation?
Do you want to start, Daniel?
Well, you were the SME during that little session that we had, since I am
But you have the real.
I'm the new guy. But we talked about, why do we track number of applications? And I think Sharon broke it down pretty well, is that we're looking to use that as where we're getting our volunteers from, the referral source. And I think that's, very, very pertinent, because if we're sending out advertisements through different types of newspapers or bulletins and things like that, and we're not getting any volunteers from those recruitment processes, we have to change our approach or find another source that we can pull from, is what I got from Sharon, the SME.
No, that's spot on, Daniel. And I would just add to that as part of the whole application tracking so that you know who are the sources so that you can put your energy towards the sources that are really working for you or that are relevant to your mission, but to have a timeline so that you can track and just use even an Excel spreadsheet so that if the volunteers are coming in, say you get 27 referrals, people interested, but after orientation, you lose 50% of the people, then it's important to, and I cannot, after 50 years of volunteering and being a volunteer coordinator, stress the importance of a phone call. Why did those people not come back to do the training, or if they dropped out of the training? So that in the end, if you only have 11 people who are willing to be, say, tutors, why did you go from 27 to 11? And I have to say, taking 3 or 4 minutes for a phone call to call somebody and say, Erin, I'm so glad you came to our orientation, but I see you didn't follow up to sign up for training. We would love for you to. What happened is invaluable.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sharon. That's a great reminder for all of us. And thank you to you and Daniel. We had a really good conversation, and and that's really what and thank you to the other group as well, right? Like, that's really the point, is we track these things, but if we don't, we can sometimes lose sight of the purpose of them, right? So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Give me 1 second here. Oh, it's going to take me, sorry. Boop, boop, boop. There we go. Okay. So do I still have you guys? Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, perfect. Sorry. I'm not seeing the little toggle things. So, okay. So, I mean, it's really understanding. So there may be things you may say, yes, we absolutely want to track the number of applications or the number of volunteers because X, Y, Z, right? There can be very good rationale for why you're measuring those things. The important thing is that you are reflecting on what those things are actually telling you. So I know we only have a short time remaining. What I'd like to do with the rest of the time is really walk you through a model that I've developed that hopefully maybe inspires you to think about metrics in a few new ways. So it's a 4-quadrant model, which I feel like is very redundant because quadrant means 4. But anyways, and there's 4 things. So you're measuring performance and you're measuring outcome, and you're doing so at both the internal level and the external level. So performance metrics are really those things that tell you how you are doing as a leader of volunteers, right? So how are you performing? So going back to, I think Sharon, you had talked, a while back about, is this tied to your job goals, right? Absolutely. You can put your performance goals in there. But you'll see when I show some examples, a lot of these things actually aren't, they're not the kinds of things we typically have in our goals. They're very internal to leaders of volunteers, and really about our practice and the enhancement of our practice. The other side is about the outcomes, right? So it's the so what. So we do X, Y, and Z. What difference is it making? It's really thinking about, again, those bigger goals, aligning with the organization's strategy, aligning with your, maybe your full year's goals, or maybe your, 2-year strategic plan. Hey, if we want to get to here and we're here, we need to start taking those steps along the way. And then, as I said, looking at that both from an internal perspective and an external perspective. So you might be saying, well, what the heck does that mean, Erin? Well, here's an example. So in the bottom left-hand corner is performance and internal. So internal performance are things like, how are you doing with the number of roles that are available that you fill? How are you doing with the percentage of high match candidates from your postings? And you might say, well, what does that tell me? Well, it tells you actually from an internal performance that if you're maybe getting, you know, 1 million applications, so that's actually an external performance. So you're getting lots of interest from those postings or from other kind of marketing that you're doing. So that can be a good thing. You're seeing how people are reacting and responding to what you're doing. But from an internal perspective, performance perspective, maybe a very low percentage of those are high match candidates. Well, that's a really good insight to tell you that I need to maybe be a little bit more specific about what we're really looking for and the types of qualities and skills that we need to have in place. And I'll give you an example. I worked at the Canadian Cancer Society for many, many years, and there was a drivers program where we had volunteer drivers who drove cancer patients to their treatment appointments. Very similar. I'm sure many of you either have run those programs before or are familiar with them. And invariably, our program ran from Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, right? So during business hours. But there was lots of times when you might have the odd treatment that maybe went late or something like that. And also, we know that not all volunteers are available Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. But if those were our program parameters, and invariably, I would say a solid 30 to 40% of our applicants were people, when we asked them for their availability, they said evenings and weekends. But what they wanted to do was to drive cancer patients to their treatment. So there's a real disconnect. And now, from a reputational point of view, we've not only created more work for ourselves, but we've now kind of set a bit of an expectation. There's a bit of a psychological contract with this person because they're like, oh, wow, you know, the Canadian Cancer Society really needs volunteer drivers in my community. And hey, I'm willing to do that. And not realizing, because I haven't done a good enough job of really specifying critical pieces in the posting, they're going to get disappointed. So not only do I have more work because I've got all these applicants, but with so many of them actually not being people that we actually can match with this role that we've now gotten them excited about, it creates not only an extra workload because you have to now manage that relationship, but also that I'm not actually filling my role. So that's just an example. So there's the internal performance, and then the external performance is how people are responding to the things that you as a leader or volunteer are doing. So for example, the number of volunteer applications received, that's how people, are, is it engaging? Is it interesting? You're catching their attention or you're not. The number of referrals from active or former volunteers, right? That's about, a lot of your performance, which is, people are saying, yeah, I volunteered there. It was great. I'm not able to volunteer right now, or maybe I am still volunteering, but, I think you would really love it here, right? So that's external. On the outcome side, this is really about the so what, right? And the other kind of behaviors that we're trying to drive in other people, right? So we're managing our own performance, and the other side is the outcomes. So from an internal perspective, what is the number of our volunteers who are donors? We know that, based on research, 65 to 70% of volunteers are donors, and they tend to donate where they volunteer. So is that, are you skewing higher or lower than that? Things like that, right? So are people really, if your volunteers should be one of your strongest donor bases, right? Because they're the ones that are seeing the impact and the power of your mission, right? Because they're the ones driving it and delivering it. So if you've got a lower thing, then that's a scary, that's definitely a flag for you. What about the percentage of your volunteers who are net promoters? And for those of you that aren't familiar with the term net promoter, basically it's a Likert scale, a 10-point scale from 1 to 10, and it asks people, how likely are you to to tell others, and speak positively about this organization. And actually, if you say, let's say 6 out of 10, that's actually considered a detractor. So from 1 to 7, you're not considered a promoter of your organization. It's really like I think 7, but it might be 8 to 10. It's only if you actually mark rank in that level that you're considered a promoter of the organization. So really, those are your biggest fans, right? And then from an external perspective, what are the number of donations from family and friends of volunteers, right? Like clearly these are the people that should be the most bought in. They have the most front row seat to the impact that's happening in your organization, the difference that your organization's making. So one of the best external outcomes is that they're telling people about the amazing work that's happening, about the difference, about the need, right? So that's an external outcome. I'm just going to pause there and see, are there any questions? Feel free to take yourself off mute and let me know.
I have a quick question. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if you mentioned this. Can you repeat, if you haven't already, the percent of volunteers with positive net promoter scores? What is that exactly again?
Yeah, no, not a problem. So basically the Net Promoter Score is an international, it's an internationally recognized kind of standard for when brands, typically brands use it for marketing to say, are people really positive about our brand, right? So it's a 10-point scale. And so basically they ask the question, it's a standard question that's used. And I think the question is, how likely are you to tell others or to refer others to this product? So it could be, if you bought some makeup, and you go to Sephora, how likely are you to recommend Sephora to your friends? If you go to a restaurant, how likely are you to recommend this restaurant to your friends? So if you choose, anywhere from 1 to 6 or 7 out of 10, you're not considered a promoter of that brand. But and again, I apologize, I can't remember actually if it's 7 or 8. If somebody knows, please speak up. But basically it's a very small window. So we think about, I'm trying to think of the term we used to use, like it was very common, is like your raving fans, right? Your biggest promoters, your biggest fans. That's really what the Net Promoter Score is like how bought in are your volunteers, your clients, your donors, your sponsors, how bought in are they to your brand and to your organization? So the Net Promoter Score is just one measure. Some people use it, lots of people don't, but it is an international kind of standard that you can kind of benchmark against. Does that help? I think that was Gina that asked that question.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, good question. Any other questions? All right. So you might say, well, that's all well and good. That's just a bunch of metrics on a piece of paper, Erin, but how do I even start? Because I'm still collecting a gazillion other things. So how do I start? Well, here's 2 ways. The first way that I would say to start is really to start tracking your own performance. And we do this to a degree as leaders of volunteers, but I wouldn't say we're always doing it in a way where we're collecting metrics that actually matter. So and I'll actually show the quadrant again. But really what we want to know is, so for example, the group that was talking about the number of applications, you might say, well, that's great. We had, we can post in 1 million places and we get referrals from these 30 locations. Well, none of us have, time where we're just sipping daiquiris and, twirling our thumbs, right? We're all very busy. We have to be very strategic with how we're using our time and how we're focusing our energies and our resources, right? So that's great. There's no shortage of places we can be posting, and maybe we get volunteers, a handful of volunteers here, a handful of volunteers here. But what we really want to know is, like, if we can only post in 5 places, what are those places that are going to get us not just the right volume of people, but the right fit of people, right? So, like that's an example of tracking your own performance so that you maybe it's taking you 3 hours to post in, 5 different sites. Well, if you can say, well, actually, really, these 2 sites get us the bulk, the majority of the people that are the best fit for this, for this posting, then great, you've just saved yourself some time. It doesn't mean that you might, if your capacity expands, or maybe you find out that, that actually this role, these 2 sites are the best places to post, but maybe actually for another role, one of the other sites is, right? So you can get really, really targeted and strategic about that. But tracking your own performance is a really valuable way for you to start using metrics. And a lot of the things are not, the way that we say that we're effective in our work is not the stuff that we typically get told to track, like volunteer hours, like, like number of active volunteers. Like that's really not, a lot of that is kind of beyond our control. But the things that we can control, our performance is, are we really connecting with the people that are the right fit for what we're trying to recruit for, that have an alignment of values with our organization, that are going to really become supporters of our organization, that we can build a relationship with over time. So tracking your own performance can be really powerful in terms of being able to say, well, hey, like I'm getting 80% of the roles that that we have available, I'm able to fill in a month or less, right? Like that's a pretty powerful statement to be able to say. And it really starts positioning you as really an expert and having expertise in what you do. The second way that I would say is a good place to start is to identify key myths that would be beneficial to debunk, or gaps that you have that need shoring up. So if we think about the kind of barriers that all of us face, whether that's a lack of buy-in, maybe it's a coworker who's a staff partner to volunteers who's really not doing a great job, right? Think about the things that that are really kind of barriers or challenges or making your life more difficult from an organizational perspective, right? I mean, it could be as simple as saying, so Linda, just to go back to the example you shared, maybe you actually want to track how long it's taking you to compile all of these metrics, and that every month you're being asked to collect something different, and it takes time to do that. And and it is what it is. The time is the time. But if you're able to say, like in this amount of time, I could have also been doing X, Y, and Z, which is actually much more powerful and impactful, right? Being able to use that to make arguments, to grow your influence, to exert a little bit of power in your organization, or to just challenge things. So for example, another thing that I hear all the time is we talk about volunteers separately from donors, right? And using the examples I just shared, 65 to 70% of volunteers are donors. So, it's really helpful when we're talking about, treating donors differently than volunteers. If we can say, guys, this is a false dichotomy. We're treating them as 2 different audiences. They're not, right? It's kind of like that gluten example. Let's say like most of our volunteers are donors, not all of our donors are volunteers, right? But when we're talking about donors and separating them as if they're a completely different species from volunteers, that's just not the case. And so we need to be respectful and to acknowledge that a large portion of our donor base are our volunteers, right? So think about the things, those myths, that volunteers are unreliable, that we can't hold them accountable, all the different things that we face in our organizations, and think about what are the metrics that you could collect that are going to start debunking that stuff. Because I find as leaders of volunteers, so much of our time and energy is actually just spent just weeding through the crap, right? It's beyond, before you can actually really get to the work that you know you want to do, that you know you need to do, that you know is going to make a difference. You're just weeding through all this other stuff. So think about how you can use metrics to really start just saying, yeah, no, sorry, that's just not the truth, right? Like here's what it is. I was able to pull this information, you know, and I'm now able to say to you with proof, with, you know, this is a data informed statement. This isn't just my opinion. This is data informed. Here's the data, but this is the way it is, right? So think about that as well. So tracking your own performance, because again, we can always be more effective and efficient. And secondly, really identifying those myths and debunking those things, or really just highlighting those core gaps, right? Like if you know that, or if you suspect that, the example of orientations, like we had, you know, X number of people come out to orientation and then 50% of them dropped off. Well, that is absolutely a big red flag, right? So what is driving that, right? Is there maybe you have again a colleague that you send volunteers to as their supervisor, and you have constant turnover, right? Being able to quantify that, to say, hey, I'd really like to talk to you. This is what I'm seeing, and it's, you know, this is the impact, right? It means that I'm having to recruit more. We're getting bad word of mouth because we're not retaining volunteers. Let's figure out what's going on. So those are two ways that I would suggest to start using metrics. So now when we start thinking even more deeply about the quadrants, we can actually say, so, you know, the number of applications that we got, but from which campaigns? Maybe is it, we ran a spring campaign or a fall campaign, or maybe we ran a campaign profiling a client versus a volunteer. So you might have different marketing campaigns. You might have different channels, right? You're posting on this site, or maybe you're doing a volunteer fair, and the time of year, right? So all of those things, you can really start parsing it down and getting really specific. And again, these aren't maybe things that you do forever, but from a performance perspective, until you get a sense of, where could you be going? I would say that these are things that actually do save you time a lot. They save you a lot more time than it takes to actually track some of these things. And maybe you only need to, track it to get a benchmark, right? And then you measure from there. Things like, let's talk about, so donations from friends and family, the top right corner, and outcomes. Donations from friends and family, but from which volunteers and for which programs and which fundraisers. What you might realize is that actually, we've really been promoting this one program. So let's say, Gina, for you, for Habitat for Humanity, we've really been promoting, this one build, but we realized that we're not getting any donations to this other program, which is also running, maybe because we haven't been communicating it enough or at all, or maybe they don't know all of our needs, and they would be really interested to know. If they're interested in this, they might be even more interested to know about this program over here, which also has a need, right? So it allows us, again, to gain those insights, which is the point of metrics, to become more and more effective and to do better and better work. So I hope that's been helpful. I'd like to take you through, in the time that remains, just a brief reflection, and then open it up for questions. So just take a moment, take a breath, and start thinking about, what are 3 kind of aha moments you had during this session? Hopefully you had 3 or more, but what were some of those aha moments? So, oh, wow, I never thought about it like that. Or, oh, I've never heard of that. What are those 3 aha moments? And then I want you to think about 2 ideas for metrics that you're taking away from today. And finally, I want you to commit to 1 step that you're going to take after today's session. So just take a few minutes and think about those 3 aha moments, the 2 metric ideas, and the one step that you're going to commit to. And I'll just give you a minute to reflect on that, to make a few notes. And I'll leave this slide up, but the next section is Q&A. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to take yourself off mute and ask away.
Well, Erin, this is Sharon. I just want to re-emphasize something that you talked about, that you touched on, which was donors and finances. And I think this is a really great opportunity for volunteer leadership to be in the decision-making circle with the executive director and the board leadership. And that is being informed in what are the grants, what are we being funded for? And is there an aspect of that grant that requires volunteer engagement? And what is the measure that the funder is looking for? And I stress this as a funder because if I have given your organization $50,000 to say have drivers training and pay for insurance so that you can increase the number of drivers serving homebound seniors, then I darn well want to see some metrics related to that program. And so I think this is a really, it's back to that communication and information loop to inform volunteer leadership on what are the important metrics aligned with our agency's programs and goals for this year.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely, Sharon, here, here. And I think right now with the pandemic, you know, there's also a huge opportunity for us to come, you know, and really, you know, use this information. I mean, it could be, keep in mind that, you know, metrics aren't always just, you know, hard numbers. It can be focus groups. It can be the one-on-one conversations, right? It can be qualitative information. It doesn't always have to be quantitative, which is numerical, you know, and that can be a really important insight into helping shape how your organization is, you know, re-engaging volunteers and how you're moving forward. So now, especially, I think there is a huge opportunity for us as leaders of volunteers to step forward. Thank you.
That's good stuff. I don't mean to interrupt, but it's 5:01 and I wasn't sure. I know some people are like, we gotta go. But I don't know if anyone else has any questions, and I don't want to cut them off or anything like that. But if you do, go for it.
And my contact information is on the screen, so the conversation certainly doesn't have to end. Feel free to reach out to me. But yeah, I thank you very much for having me. I hope this has been it maybe inspired a few new ideas, maybe clarified a few things for you, and maybe challenged you in some ways that that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, it was good information. It's good to be reminded of some of the ways that we can measure and look at data and, you know, humans also and their impact, you know, to our organizations. Yeah, you have a request to send us some rain and some cool air.
It's supposed to storm tomorrow, so I will happily send it your way.
Nice. But again, thank you so much, especially on kind of short notice. And I know it's later where you are, so really appreciate it. Hope your partner's not like waiting for dinner or something like that.
He can wait. He can wait. It's fine.
But thank you. Hope to be in touch and see you soon, Erin.